Good evening, and thank you for joining us for this installment of the Family Forum series offered by the Sioux Falls School District with experts from Avera. My name is Lindsay Myers, and tonight we will focus on the topic of vaping and children's health. During this session, we'll share some helpful advice on how to identify certain behaviors, talking to your child about vaping, as well as what resources are available to you as parents. At this time, I'd like to introduce Dr. James Nold, Assistant Superintendent of the Sioux Falls School District, who will offer a welcome.
Good evening. On behalf of the Sioux Falls School District, I again want to welcome you to this 9-part presentation that is titled the Family Forum Series. First, I want to take this opportunity to again thank Avera for their partnership with the Sioux Falls School District in providing this service to our families. This is the 6th installment of the series, and we hope you have found the previous presentations and information to be of great benefit. You are welcome to watch all the previous presentations that have been recorded and are available for you for viewing at the Sioux Falls School District Counseling website. You are also welcome to join us on the 3rd Tuesday of each month to hear information on a new topic. Each topic is intended to strengthen and support our families by providing information and resources that exist right here in our community. And now, I look forward to hearing from our presenter this evening, and please do not hesitate to provide us feedback on the Sioux Falls School District Let's Talk app that can be found on the Sioux Falls School District website. Thank you again, and now back to our hosts.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nold. We'll now move to our presentation. We're pre-recording this session, so we'll not be taking live questions, but we'll leave some time at the end to address some of the top concerns that we've heard from parents. Tonight's program will be presented by Dr. Tony Herricks. Dr. Herricks is a pulmonologist and also the Director of Critical Care at Avera McKinnon Hospital. We want to welcome Dr. Herricks and thank you so much for presenting.
Thank you, Lindsay. So I'm Tony Herricks. I'm one of the pulmonary critical care and sleep doctors at Avera, as she has introduced me. In the past, I've spoken to you about vaping, and I think it's time to update where we're at. And it's my pleasure to present to you the 2000 Family Forum Series Vaping, a Health Crisis presentation. So as you know, tobacco is a big issue, and as a pulmonologist, I deal with that quite frequently. In the 1860s, tobacco came over from the European countries to the United States. And it wasn't until the 1940s or 50s that we realized that tobacco caused severe detrimental disease to the human person. And as you can see from this slide here, tobacco contributes to greater than 480,000 deaths per year. It's the leading cause of all cancers and associated with a pretty horrible lung disease called COPD. If you take lung cancer out of that cancer risk, you can see that if you add breast, colon, and prostate cancer, that it is the #1 cause of cancer-related death in the United States. And there's somewhere over 24 million Americans that are affected by chronic lung disease from smoking. And COPD is the 4th leading cause of death, with right behind heart disease, cancer, and then unintentional injuries. So now we're dealing with a topic called vaping, which kind of falls in that same category. And what vaping or e-cigarettes are a battery-powered device, for the lack of better terms, that delivers nicotine to you instead of having to burn it like you would with a cigar or cigarette. Unfortunately, they have made this a little bit more appealing to people because they can add flavoring and other ingredients to it. This was initially invented in 2003 in Hong Kong, and it was thought to be a cleaner nicotine delivery device without any major harmful side effects. But what we know now that it does create an aerosol, and in those aerosol there are some harmful chemicals. So the myth that it's a harmless water vapor is wrong. It became commercially available to us in the United States in about 2006, and as you'll see on the next slides, it comes in various shapes and sizes, and you might hear various names like e-cigarettes, vapes, e-hookahs, vape pens, vape mods, etc. So this is a picture of all kinds of types of electronic cigarettes, and as you can see, some of them actually look like a cigarette or cigar. As you can see in the right-hand corner there's the Juul pods that became really a big issue back in 2019. And on the bottom left, you can see how they can be disguised as pens or markers in a student's bag, and may not be something that you're readily aware of that they're carrying or have been using. The next slide kind of breaks down what all these devices are made of. At the top left, you can see there's a mouthpiece. Then there's a tank that holds the e-liquid or the juice. There's a microprocessor and a heating element there that warm up the liquid so it can be turned into an aerosol or a vapor. And then obviously a battery that has to run this. And they're all almost essentially made up of these parts in one way, shape, or form. And that heating element I will bring forward as we get down later into some of the concerns about how this can cause damage to the human lung. Common vaping products which you may have heard include Juul, Geek Vape, Smoke, Puff Bar. There's many more brands out there of e-liquid that you can put in a lot of these vaping devices. These are not tobacco leaves that you have to deal with, so it is essentially a water-based product that contains other substances that we deliver into the lungs in order to get the drug into our body. There were also some heated tobacco products such as IQOS and Eclipse. Essentially, instead of burning the leaves and creating smoke, they heat the leaves, which created a vapor and released the nicotine, and then the person that was using it would inhale into their lungs. The unfortunate thing is, as I stated with smoking, it took us about 100 years to figure out the real severity of what's happening to our lungs and happening to the human body because of tobacco-related nicotine delivery. And now we're kind of early into this, as you see, as early as 2006, and maybe really not till 2019 when this became a problem, that we're not sure what the long-term side effects of vaping means for everyone. One of the things that comes a lot is cost and how do they compare to cigarettes? And this is just a generalization, so take it for what it's worth. But as you can see, a lot of starter kits from the vaping devices cost anywhere between $30 to $60. However, you can spend as much as $150 or more on some of the kits. And then replacement pods can be up to $6 to $70. I put 12 there because I think when I looked on the Juul website, you could get 2 pods for up to around $12. And then if you look at a pack of cigarettes, roughly around $7 to $8, somewhere between that $6 and $11 range, depending on what you smoke. Now, if you want to compare them side to side, most pods, for the lack of better terms, carry about 1 milliliter of 5% nicotine. That equates to 50 milligrams of nicotine, and I put pure nicotine there because when you take a inhalation off a vape pen, you're getting all the nicotine there, and then it stops when you exhale or you stop inhaling on the device. If you look at a cigarette, it contains 22, or a pack of cigarettes, it contains 22 to 30 milligrams of nicotine. So there's more nicotine in one pod than there is in an entire pack of cigarettes. If you look at an individual cigarette, depending on what brand is smoked, it could be up to 8 to 20 milligrams of nicotine. But however you are smoking that cigarette, it's not constantly in your mouth. You're not constantly inhaling on it. And so it takes about 10 to 15 inhalations to get to the end of that cigarette. And some believe that somewhere around 2 milligrams of nicotine may be delivered. So you're getting a lot more nicotine per inhalation, which in the end comes down to maybe a quote cost savings per se. So something like this could be a lot cheaper, bang for your buck. A Juul pod costs, as I said, about $6.50, and then a pack of cigarettes somewhere between that $5 and $8. The more concerning thing that I noticed was about 50% of calls to poison control centers around the United States are related to e-cigarette exposure in kids less than 5 years old. So if you take a 5-year-old kid with an average body weight of 40 kilograms, a toxic lethal dose of nicotine is about 1 milligram per kilogram. That means 40 milligrams could cause cerebral edema or brain swelling and cardiovascular collapse or cardiac arrest. And so you get a young kid that doesn't know what this is, sees this liquid, smells it, it smells sweet, it tastes like cotton candy, and they drink the whole thing. You might be looking at an unfortunate child that does not survive that event. where in adults a toxic lethal dose is somewhere around 30 to 60 milligrams. And it's rarely, that an adult would consume 50 milligrams of nicotine in one setting unless they were, at risk of harming themselves for one reason or another. What's inside these pods other than the nicotine? Obviously, water is the main base, but there's stuff like propylene glycol. I would encourage you to go to your cupboards and look and see how many things in there actually contain propylene glycol as a carrier. Ketchup, some of the powders that are in there. It's just a common product that's in stuff that we ingest, but I'm not sure it's ever meant to be inhaled into the lungs. Vegetable glycerin can be in there. Unfortunately, that makes things taste a little sweet, but that's a fatty substance and the lungs don't like fat inside them. Benzoic acid and other chemicals like vitamin E acetate, which will come forward here in a bit. And then obviously the common things we think about are nicotine, but marijuana or THC, cannabinoid oil, K2, which is synthetic marijuana, and other things can be inhaled through these. And then there's food grade flavors, which will be on one of the next slide, and other toxins. Some studies have shown that there could be trace amounts of carcinogens or cancer promoting products in these. As I said, marijuana or THC, cannabinoid oils such as CBD, synthetic marijuana, other flavorings, and sometimes homemade liquids. People can put whatever thing they want to inhale into their lungs into a liquid form and then inhale it through these vape pens. Flavors. In 2020, they did a study and about 82.9% of youth surveyed were using flavors when they were using their e-cigarette. 73% were a fruity flavor, 55.8% mint, and then you can see menthol and some other flavors below it. But the table to the right, if you would like to review on your own, shows you can find almost any kind of flavor e-liquid out there to satisfy whatever flavor is your favorite. So how does that work for the rest of us that are around there, and how does that compare to a cigarette? Well, from a social standpoint, the vapor evaporates quickly. So if you walk into a room where you have a bunch of people that are using an e-cigarette, you may not notice anything other than potentially a sweet odor, which is usually transient, but there will be no fog, there will be no lingering smoke. Whereas if you walked into a room where a few people were smoking, you see this big cloud hanging over everybody. Obviously, with the flavors, there are more choices to find what you like than what you can find in regular cigarettes. And if you've ever been driving down the road and you see a car that looks like there's foggy windows in it and it's got kind of this greasy film over it, almost all of those situations are people who smoke in their vehicle. With an e-cigarette, you don't have any of that tar residue that kind of coats the windows, your clothes, and other things. The other ease of it is you don't have to have anything other than your vape pen and or pod available. You don't have ashtrays and lighters. It's kind of all in one. And it's obviously easier to hide. So there's less societal limitations, whereas obviously in bars and restaurants, you can't smoke anymore. Other social concerns, initially they thought, well, people may smoke less because if you were asked to go out for your break to smoke and you only got 15 minutes, you're going to try to smoke that whole cigarette and get it done because it's kind of hard to relight it and you don't want to waste it. Whereas an e-cigarette, you can kind of puff all day. But that's one of the problems with that is you may not know how much nicotine you're taking in if you're just sucking on an e-cigarette most of the day. They thought potentially it could be less addictive. However, they do understand that nicotine, that there are things in tobacco that may drive nicotine to be more addictive. Initially, they thought there were maybe less withdrawal side effects as it was a cleaner substance, and then less toxic. There's obviously less carcinogens in it, as there's over 7,000 chemicals in a cigarette alone. However, there is still that potential that it could put you at risk of cancer. And then there was a study done in 2018 that thought if e-cigarettes were used instead of tobacco, there may be a net health benefit, short versus long term. But again, those unknown benefits or unknown risks really haven't been defined yet. So nicotine affects the brain. We all have what's called the limbic system in the brain, and that's where our emotions are at. That's the very first place in our brain that any kind of information comes into, and it's meant to be protective. So if a bear jumps out of it, we don't need to send that information from the limbic system to the prefrontal cortex where we can make a rational decision. We just need to make a major decision on emotion. The prefrontal cortex is actually the area of the brain that helps with decision making, impulse control, and executive function. And so when you alter this limbic system prefrontal cortex connection, you kind of change that risk reward system that we have. And there's high concern that people who use nicotine, either in tobacco or vaping, may actually be put at higher risk of additional addictive behaviors or addictive substances. We also know that nicotine is highly addictive, and where it affects the brain is the same place where cocaine and amphetamines and heroin go. And so that chasing the white rabbit, if you've ever heard with cocaine, where you get this huge release of catecholamines and these wonderful feelings, again, nicotine affects that same area of the brain, and so that creates a big craving for it, and also problems with withdrawal. Theoretically, it may contribute, nicotine in the setting of vaping may actually, because of the lesser amounts of nicotine and the higher concentration, may also increase addiction. And just as with smoking, there are sensory effects, flavor enjoyment, hand-to-mouth behaviors. For example, a lot of smokers will say, well, I just can't quit because I got to have that cigarette with my morning coffee. Or if they go to the bar or they're in certain environments, they get those cravings, just like you and I might have those feelings when we walk into grandma's house and smell the pumpkin pie and the turkey, because that's where we always have Thanksgiving. The brain has those memory effects and can store that behavior for future reference. It can not only affect the brain, but other organ systems. Again, we talked about nicotine potentially being a cancer promoter that may drive other cancer inducers. It obviously contributes to hypertension or high blood pressure. It's been shown to contribute to atherosclerotic vascular disease, which can increase your risk of heart attacks and strokes. And it may also clamp down on those blood vessels in the kidneys, the eyes, the genital areas, and cause long-term side effects there. And then we know that nicotine itself contributes to low birth weight babies, can have some birth defects, or what we call teratogenicity. And then there's some concern about epigenetic effects, which just means as we get exposed to things in the human body, our body then genes turn off and turn on things. And that's essentially how we've evolved to who we are today, and how we've seen, growth in the human brain and human physiology over time. Nicotine can be a gateway drug. There are many studies out there that show that people who smoke are at greater risk of other addictive substances, such as cocaine, amphetamine, heroin. Marijuana is a big one, and now that we have the capability to vaporize marijuana and some of these, it kind of takes some of that stigma and social limitations out of it. And we know that there's studies out there that show teens that use e-cigarettes are 3 times more likely to smoke tobacco later in life. It may increase other risky behaviors, such as alcohol. We know that the human brain, for the most part, does not fully develop until we're about 25 years old. It actually occurs later in boys than girls, and that's why boys are a much higher risk of risky behaviors. And then we alter that limbic system prefrontal cortex connection. This is where that risky behavior comes. And now also we know that nicotine is highly addictive, therefore it makes it very difficult to quit. And as we stated, we're not sure of the long-term side effects. One of the things that's come up in the literature is when you heat that heating element in a vaping pen, they've actually found metal particles in the lungs when they've done washings of that. So those may get flecked off, and we're not sure whether they'll cause long-term damage. There's other toxins that we inhale in our lungs, as you can see on the left, diacetyl, acetylpropanol, and others. Tobacco leaves are exposed to the same thing we see in our vegetables as herbicides and pesticides. And obviously in tobacco, there's formaldehyde, which is the thing that we use to embalm bodies. So we may be, quote, embalming our lungs when we get exposed to some of that. And these toxins can contribute to chronic bronchitis, The glycerin, which is kind of a fatty component, can cause what's called a lipoid pneumonia. The diacetyl is what contributed to popcorn lung. It creates a buttery flavor, and it was used in manufacturing of like microwave popcorn. And actually the workers that were exposed to high volumes of this diacetyl ended up with something called bronchiolitis obliterans, which is a pretty severe lung disease, can make pretty sick. Blood in the lungs or alveolar hemorrhage, and then the Avera, which you'll see there, which will be on the next couple slides. So one of the things that came up in 2019 from an acute lung injury standpoint was something called Avera, or e-cigarette vaping associated lung injury. And this is why it really became a big deal. And I think this was a study published, if I remember correctly, in the New England Journal of Medicine, where they compared 51 Avera patients to 99 healthy patients, and these patients came from 16 states. They went and did what's called a bronchoscopy, where we wash the lungs out and we collect fluid and secretions from the lungs, and then we send that off to the lab for analysis. And they found that the patients that vaped had vitamin E acetate, plant oils, medium chain triglycerides or fat in their airways, coconut oil, petroleum distillates, which is essentially petroleum as gas and oil. And then there were obviously diluent terpenes, as they called them. The interesting thing is 48 of the 51 patients had vitamin E acetate. Other patients had some coconut oil and limonene in it. 47 of the 50 patients were vaping marijuana, and 30 of the 47 patients had also vaped marijuana and nicotine both. And so I think what came out of that is that vitamin E acetate was probably the contributing factor to a lot of the acute lung injury we're seeing. On the top left, you'll see what looks like a normal X-ray. And on the top right, you'll see a lot of fluffy infiltrates, or as we call them, or there's a lot of fog in the lungs. And when we look at that on a CAT scan, and this is one slice of through the middle of the chest, where you can see the big globular structure in the center, which is the heart. And then all the little white fluffy lines that are going around there on the left are blood vessels. And then the grayish black material is what normal lungs should look like. And the CT on the right shows a lot of fog in the airways, and that's the air sacs filled with debris and inflammation in the setting of somebody with acute lung injury, most likely from e-cigarette use. If you look at what normal lung looks at high power as the pathologist looks at it, you can see there's a lot of white intermixed with the pink. The pink is all the structural stuff of the lungs, and the white is the air sacs on the top left. And if you go to the bottom left, you'll see that there's nice open white sacs, thin alveolar capillary membranes, as they call them. And then you compare it to the slides on the right, and you see there's a lot of pink and purple in there. And those are all inflammatory cells and inflammatory debris that have filled all those white spaces, which prevents oxygen from getting in there and causes damage and puts people in respiratory on ventilators. And sometimes that damage can be severe enough that it puts people in the hospital and potentially needing a lung transplant. And the bottom right is just a high power view where you can see lots of pink and purple and inflammatory cells. And the white in there is actually fat deposits in the lung that don't allow oxygen to get in either. So in 2019 is when this hit home. And what you can see is around September of 2019, there was this peak. In August of 2019, this picked up for whatever reason. And then there was an interesting thing that happened in 2019. Number one, there was the E-Valley cases, which brought a lot of light to vaping and e-cigarettes. And then there was also that little known disease called COVID, which started becoming a huge problem. And so this kind of just went away a little bit as far as the acute lung injury and vaping epidemic, at least on this graph, but I think it's still very prevalent. And I'll show you some statistics at the end of this. During that vaping epidemic in February of 2020, over 2,800 cases of acute lung injury were reported. They were reported in 49 U.S. states and the District of Columbia, as well as one U.S. territory. There were 68 confirmed deaths that were related to vaping, and these were found in 29 states and the District of Columbia. Most of these were associated with marijuana, but some of them were associated with nicotine only. And Ironically, in 2019, the most common tobacco product in the state of South Dakota was an e-cigarette or a vaping device. So additional health concerns, other than what I've already brought up, we know that vaping has been shown to contribute to asthma, the popcorn lung or lung scarring, heart and vascular injury, obviously the brain development we went through. Things I didn't really touch on is there's been evidence that these devices have exploded and caused injury to hands, fingers, and faces. And then the medical particle stuff in the lung that I talked about, as well as the other chemicals, which we don't know whether they're going to cause scarring. So here are some of those additional statistics that pertain to our children. In 2014, e-cigarettes were the most common tobacco product among youth. In 2018, there were an estimated 3.6 million middle and high school students that had used a vaping device in the last 30 days. There are about 4.9% of our middle school students and about 21% of our high school students. And about 40% of those had never experienced tobacco in any way, shape, or form, or smoking prior to that. Then you fast forward, or you go back to 2017, we had some data that showed 2.8% of adults were using vaping devices. 11.4% of those in 2015 had never smoked. About 30% were smokers, and about 58.8%, or sorry, about 30% were former smokers, and close to 60% were active smokers that were both vaping and smoking. Now you fast forward to last year, and you see we may have made a little bit of headway, as 3.3% of middle schoolers and about 14% of high schools students that were surveyed had vaped in the last 30 days. The interesting thing here is, as boys are much more common to be at risky behaviors, but girls were actually 15% versus 13% for boys. So females were taking this up more frequently than the males. About 1.5% of middle school and about 5% of high school students had not only used vaping, but also other forms of tobacco, whether that's cigarette or chewing tobacco in the last 30 days in the survey as well. If you look at marketing and perception, this is where things have hopefully changed a little bit. When they looked at this back in 2019 and 20, about 70% of our high school and middle school students had seen an advertisement for e-cigarettes. About 80% of them surveyed didn't think that there was any harm with vaping. About 66% of them thought it was just flavored vapor, and about 30% of them that had used e-cigarettes once had been more likely to try a tobacco cigarette. If you go a little bit further into the age bracket of the 18 to 20-year-olds or Generation Z, about 20% of them believed vaping was harmless. And then the older group of millennials, 28 to 38, about 24% of them thought vaping was harmless. So there was a lot of lack of information out there on how much harm this could contribute. So as an adult or as a caregiver or as a teacher or a counselor or administrator, what do we need to look for? Do students now have more of a secret attitude? Are they hiding things? Are they being a little bit withdrawn? Are they, you see them around all the time, but now they're not there. What are they doing? Obviously that oral fixation I talked about, do they need to have a pen or a pencil in their mouth all the time? Due to the limitations of the vaping, there might be more withdrawal side effects. So you might see some more mood swings. Due to the stimulation of nicotine, you may also see some anxiety, and that can be exacerbated by caffeine. You might see sleep patterns change because nicotine is a stimulant. Due to the drying nature of the vapor and the nicotine in the mouth, you may see them carrying around water bottles more and drinking more. Nicotine depresses the appetite and also decreases saliva. So food doesn't taste as good. Kids might start losing weight unintentionally. They might start using more salt or spices on their food, and you might see them just not eating as well as they should. And due to that stimulation and that, co-stimulation with anxiety, you may see them decreasing caffeine consumption. Again, due to the drying effects, you may see nosebleeds, mouth sores, eye irritation. They can complain of dizziness, nausea. They might have more headaches. You might see more acne pop up. Depending on the device, you may see some burns on the fingertips. And then a lot of the signs and symptoms is that persistent cough that just doesn't go away and you wonder why they're doing it. Walk into the room, you see unexplained sweet scents that you might smell, or you start noticing withdrawal symptoms if they haven't been able to get nicotine into their system. So what do we do if we have somebody that we know needs to quit either vaping and or other nicotine products like tobacco? I think as providers and those that are trying to raise our kids to be good people, is encourage them not to start. If you don't start, then you don't have to worry about quitting. You don't have to worry about withdrawal. You don't have to worry about the associated long-term side effects. But if they or you are in this situation, set a quit date. Don't set it too soon, because if you set it too soon, maybe you won't be ready. And if you set it too long, it gives yourself time to talk yourself out of it. The other thing is, don't quit during a stressful time. Nicotine gives you that sense of well-being and calm. And a lot of my patients tell me they use it to treat their anxiety. So if you're in a very stressful situation, such as testing periods, maybe now is not the time to quit, because it may just compound the ability to get rid of it. Setting yourself up for success. I always jokingly say, if there were no Oreos in the house, then I wouldn't gain weight. I'd have to drive to the store to go get them. So if you don't have cigarettes, vaping devices, lighters, ashtrays, maybe you can talk yourself out of it by the time you get to the car or to the grocery store or to the gas station to buy whatever you need to buy. And if you get to the point where you think you need help, there's medications that can be used, and there are some here. Unfortunately, we do not have a lot of good evidence in our teen population, the safety of these medications and the efficacy of how well they work to quit. Talk to your school counselors, as they may have resources that they can get you referred onto. Psychiatry, counseling, hypnosis have been known to be helpful. And you can also try to call the quote state unquote quit line, whether that's Iowa, Minnesota, South Dakota, or other, just to make sure that they don't have any resources for you. Just like any kind of habit, knowing your challenge, what are your triggers? What are the things that are going to bring up those cravings and encourage you to smoke? Develop mitigation strategies. So if it's anxiety that drives it, how can I control my anxiety without nicotine? And understand withdrawal side effects, that there might be some mood changes, but how can I control those instead of going back to nicotine? A couple last things is stay the course. Most people who try to quit smoking do not quit the first time. It takes a few times for people to quit, and usually they do. So realize you may fail, but realize that starting up and doing the right thing and quitting again is very important. So the old try and try again attitude. And then quit completely. Again, not eating a whole row of Oreos is probably the right thing, but maybe not eating Oreos is the best thing. So if you're going to quit tobacco or quit vaping, you can't cheat here and there, because then it's not really quitting, it's just cutting back. So I'd be happy to take any questions down the road if you need to. And this is the end of my presentation. I hope you all learned something, and let me know if there's anything else I can do.
Dr. Herricks, thank you for that information. Just a couple questions that we have here that came in from some of our counselors. Sometimes we see some of those high school students, especially if they're involved in activities like athletics. Does smoking vape and things, sometimes there's that myth out there that it does absolutely nothing to you. Does that have some type of a hindrance on a child that's going out for athletics or being involved in athletic events? Is there any way that would impede that?
So the myth is that the vapor doesn't cause any problems, but you're obviously inhaling something in your lungs that shouldn't necessarily be there. And one of the things that I've heard is that a lot of the athletic students, or those that are in some sort of competition, band, debate, or other, may use this to calm their anxiety, which hopefully helps them to participate a little bit easier. But when you put that into your lungs and it's causing lung irritation and swelling in the lungs, it may decrease your ability to sing, to speak. You may have that cough. You may develop more shortness of breath, which may limit your potential with whatever event you're doing, whether it's athletics or whether it has anything to do with lung volume or communication.
Dr. Herrick, thank you for that answer. One more question that we would have is sometimes there's the belief that because they're younger, it really doesn't impact them near as much. Is there a difference of the impact on e-cigarettes or vaping compared to a young juvenile or adolescent compared to maybe an adult?
So kind of the answer to that question is, are we 6 feet tall and bulletproof, as I usually say? And what we don't realize that when we're in our 70s and 80s and we start developing all these medical problems, a lot of those things stem from what we did to our bodies when we were younger, whether that's alcohol, lack of exercise, obesity, smoking, poor diet, contributes to vascular disease, strokes, heart attacks. When we talk about inhalation of stuff into our lungs, COPD, pulmonary fibrosis, and other chronic lung disease such as asthma. So yes, that can actually affect the young child more so because they're growing exponentially and their tissues are actively replicating and growing. And anything you can do to blunt or scar those tissues early on actually contributes to the inability of them to get their full functional capacity later in life. And the most important thing that I think that is really brought forward is where nicotine affects the brain. I talked about the human brain developing and becoming more solidified and routine in its practices after the age of 25. And again, boys mature much slower than girls when it comes to that. So that limbic system in the brain that's supposed to be part of the risk reward system, and then it goes to that prefrontal cortex of the brain, which is supposed to control those emotions, make us think more rationally. Essentially, if you alter that function of the brain, now risk reward becomes skewed and you're much likely to take greater risk for whatever pleasurable reward you want without taking that time for contemplation and rationalization to say, is this really something important to me? Is this really something I should do? What is the harm associated with it? And when you lose that ability, you're more likely to take rash decisions. You're more likely to do risky behaviors. You're more likely to try things that maybe aren't healthy for you. So yes, I think not only physiologically can it scar the younger person more than the older person, mentally it will too. And I think the younger you start, the more lead time you have on that damage.
Thank you to Dr. Herrick for presenting tonight's session on vaping. This session will be added to the Sioux Falls School District's website under the Counseling Services area. Our next session will focus on grief and loss and what parents should be aware of when it comes to their children's health. This session will be presented on March 21st from 6 to 7 p.m. Login information will be under the Counseling Services area. Thank you so much for joining us and have a great night.